Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Transforming Financial Services with DevOps. Again, I'm Garima Bajpai. I'm based out of Ottawa, Canada. People who don't know me, I am the founder for the DevOps community of practice here in Canada, which has several chapters: Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Edmonton, Atlantic provinces. These chapters are led by chapter leads, as well as if you have not checked out our face to face meetup, please, I encourage you to check out the schedule for these face to face meetups, join the chapters in your location, and help us steer the needle for DevOps in Canada. Again, you will find interesting conversation, meet interesting people. We go slideless in these meetups which are face to face. So again, this is a pure networking event where you can learn, engage, and have fun. So let's quickly get started with today's session. We will talk about transforming financial services with DevOps, and this session is inspired by a book, Industrializing Financial Services with DevOps. The author of this book, I'm trying to bring him in at certain point in time for having a conversation with us. But for now, this book, you know, I have some copies. If you happen to be face to face in one of our meetups, you can also get hold of one of the copies. So I thank Pact for sponsoring those books, and let's now get started. So, overview of financial services. If you have joined my sessions in the past, I always start with some basic understanding about what we are going to talk about. Financial services. What is a financial service? Financial service is not a good itself. So, a process in acquiring the financial good. In other words, it involves the transaction required to obtain that financial good. Financial services has a broad range of more specific activities such as banking, investing, insurance, and you would appreciate all these ecosystem of financial services is transforming. Companies in the financial service industries manage money. Obviously, the way we use money, so we spend money, we consume, this asset is changing, so is our financial services. When financial systems start to break down, what happens? The economy starts to suffer. So it is very, very careful due diligence which is required for any kind of transformation in this industry segmentation. Okay, so let's get going with some micro or macro trends. And this is inspired by a report from PwC, The Future of Financial Services. I picked and have chosen five of these key points, which I thought that were very relevant to this conversation today. So firms face an unrelenting pressure to boost productivity through the digitization of business and the workforce. So we have all undergone through the pandemic, and we see how the workforce is changing, how the competence framework is changing, and also how the consumer needs are changing in the space. So it creates a substantial amount of pressure in the financial sector. The client driven shift to a platform and ecosystem based financial service industry is in making. So for example, digital currencies, even your trading and investing systems, if you think about how you consume and how do you transact in today's digital ecosystem, everything has been shifted to a platform or an ecosystem based industry segment, right? The third part of this trend would be acceleration of implementation of current and planned regulatory measures in many countries and many regions. So it is needless to say, with new regulatory laws like GDPR, and then there is even in the financial sectors, there are very, very specific audits and regulatory bodies which are looking at like specifics. If you think about like European Central Bank, they have their like regulatory authority which does audits on technology, tooling, processes, and so on and so forth, right? So every country has their own kind of setup, and also there is a need for a global standardized way of looking at it in a unified manner. increased demand of non-bank credit providers is also putting a substantial amount of pressure on incumbent, let's say, banks or incumbent providers of financial services to look at their services in new way, and also embracing that new ecosystem where they can build partnerships, structure the market with some kind of a risk mitigation strategy which works for the consumer. And lastly, I would say renewed focus on nearshoring and diversification of offshore locations. Of course, with the changing geopolitical scenarios, I think it is extremely important we take control of our own destiny. So with these kind of micro trends, I believe that there are opportunities and there are challenges. Before we talk about DevOps here, I think we'll talk about some opportunities in the financial services. So portfolio management being one of them, trending micropayments based economy. What it means is that we are primarily dominated by micropayments. If you think about like social media, if you think about the transactions around the ecosystem, more and more micropayments are happening, and of course it brings a need for change in the portfolio segmentation itself. Diversification and personalization of financial services require focus on an ability to seamlessly integrate software technology across the entire value chain. Crowdsourcing and marketplace. To leverage the ecosystem of innovative products and remain competitive, it is important to create interoperable, event-driven platforms which are standardized and automated in one way. I'll also talk about operating model. Traditional financial services are transforming, so is the operating model. The key characteristic of next generation operating model is, first of all, invisible. So basically, it just works seamlessly, right? It's linked and it's insight driven and it should be purposeful. So sustainability, for example, is a big part of your operating model. Embracing partnership and new market structure, I've talked about this. So reducing the cost and limiting the risk of fraud while embracing the new market structure is also important. So these opportunities also come with some challenges, right? So there are many challenges, but I have put together like these 4 of them. So the primary challenge for financial sector is they are expected to run and act commercially in a seamless manner. So what it means is optimizing expense and supporting improvement in lead time. Whenever they're launching their products and services, they have to be mindful of that. Compliant and secure by design. It is needless to say, proactively addressing compliance demands and improving security postures against any kind of cyber threats which exist in the digital ecosystem. Dealing with legacy. Modernization of legacy component is also essential. Most of the incumbent banks are, looking at consciously and also trying to kind of navigate this space with a risk mitigation strategy or risk averse strategy, I would say. And then the last component is alignment. So if you think about financial services, there are various business critical portfolios existing today in that space. So be it accounts, be it payment, trading, investing, there are several business lines and synchronization of that product portfolio so that we can leverage cross-selling, upselling, and also cross-promote our products within our existing consumer base is important. So alignment of all our initiative in one way is also needed, which brings us to the next slide. So why developing an OKR from a top-down perspective becomes important. And now I will talk about DevOps. If you are here in this session, I would assume that you know about the DevOps movement, what it is. It is a movement by the practitioners, for the practitioners, from the practitioners. It is not a tool, technology, it's a culture and mindset shift which is happening across. But then with the changes in the software development and operations practices, it also has encouraged us to look at some kind of a common core governance as always required, and also standardization. So let's talk about some OKRs in the financial industry space. So if you think about some of the top level OKRs, I have outlined a few of them, which is also inspired by the book. Improving time to market. We have also facilitated this idea in the previous slides. So achieving on-demand release to production, all that services or digital products which we are bringing on the table, we should be able to release them on demand. And the second result which we want to achieve with this objective is, probably I have mentioned 70%. You can actually check in your ecosystem what is that magic number which works. But if we say 70% of modern applications are using standardized CI/CD posture, which means 70% of the applications are cloud native, ready to go to the market in incremental and in on demand way, right? So you can experiment, you can build hypothesis on these applications and products. So motivation would be proliferation of new entrants, which can introduce new products or faster than the incumbent, let's say, financial service provider, which is always a risk. Second OKR, I would emphasize that deliver compliance as code. So look at some results like a minimum viable adherence to IT control mechanism, which can be enabled, or improvement in policy and also evidence of that improvement. What is the motivation behind it? To minimize risk and security breach impact. The third OKR could be enhancing reliability posture through SRE practices. So reliability targets across the portfolio to be revised. That can be one of the key results. The second would be identify your top 20 business critical services to implement SRE practices. The domino effect of not doing so can result in series of outages. Enabling a platform modernization mechanism can be one of the OKRs which you can drive across the organization, which the key results enabling this objective would be all new build applications fulfill cloud native, microservices, API, event driven architecture. Now, the advantage you gain is customer footprint by launching new products and services, also cross promoting, cross selling them in a cost efficient way. Now, this all looks fancy and these OKRs look all relevant, right? But how to enable these OKRs through an operating model? It's always a challenge. If we see from a leadership perspective, a lens of a leader, we can think about ways and means how to establish those first few steps to transition from an incumbent monolithic structure to a more advanced cloud native architecture of products and services, which are helping us to release fast. So again, the first and foremost thing is to create that vocabulary, create that core governance on top of everything, like who is the decision maker here. Then look at your DevOps design and advocacy group. Again, if you are transitioning from monolithic and traditional setup, I think you might have to look at like some kind of an advisory group or experts who can lay the land for you to do that transition. The third aspect is DevOps evolution ecosystem. So if you are looking at how you evolve from level, let's say level 1 to level X, what will be your journey and how you will accomplish that. Again, this would not happen without practical steps. So how do you put together work streams? So each work stream might have a work stream owner, a lead, some kind of a squad, which is a set of people who work with that particular work stream, and satellites, which are like non-permanent members who can join as domain experts and as and when required. So this is like an overall blueprint for an operating structure. You can also look at like what kind of work streams you can put together. Of course, we have listed some of them, but you can pick and choose what is relevant for your organization. So if you say DevOps ways of working, so basically it's the organizing principles, the guidelines, the common vocabulary. Look at this in one way. Portfolio classification and governance, of course, you need to classify the portfolio on the criticality level, what kind of modernization is required, from which stack and all that. Site or service reliability engineering is like practices and frameworks which you will adopt to implement and operate. DevOps experience, evolution of your OKRs. How do you evolve? How do you adopt? How do you bring that retrospective? And lastly, compliance as code, like, how do you bring compliance controls, measurement, and last but not the least, people first, like how do you hire, incubate, how do you build competence. These are aspects as a leader you should think about if you want to build some work streams around it. That would be your like the next steps in the process. Now, if you are already in there and you want to evolve your DevOps journey, and you want to orchestrate that evolution, this is again very important. Many people will argue that it should be autonomous, and it should be seamless. There should not be much effort needed to evolve and scale or orchestrate. But I think, as per my experience goes, and also taking support from the book, I think there are two aspects which becomes very, very important when you start industrializing or scaling the DevOps thinking and evolving it in one common way. So enterprise architecture and the DevOps Center of Excellence. And we will talk more about enterprise architecture. So why is it needed? So how do you think that enterprise architects or enterprise architecture team can support this transition? Look at like 4 aspects. They can help you identify the critical business domains and flow. And we can talk more about what can be your critical business domains in the later slides. Establishing reference architecture for your particular needs, architecture assembly formation, and also a technology portfolio classification. So these are some aspects which your enterprise architecture team can look at when you are starting to scale. Another aspect, as we talked about, is center of excellence. It is like a maestro, which is setting the rhythm and facilitating the journey of evolution. So it has 2 main offerings: engineering services and advisory services. So engineering services are like hands-on DevOps engineering capability, which can be like people who can support your journey and evolve it to the next level. Advisory services is consulting, observing, coaching, or deputing and guiding. So when you look at like orchestrating this whole change, I mentioned some critical business domain aspect when I was discussing the enterprise architecture. So if we define a critical business domain as if there is a discontinuity in a product or a service that can result in substantial decrease in revenue generation, directly or indirectly, that can be termed as critical business domain. Now, from a financial services, I mean, taking an example of an incumbent bank, the typical core critical domains would be like saving and deposits, loans and mortgage, payment and settlement, account and cards, open banking, risk and liquidity, trading, cash management, core technology platform being one of them as well. So these are things which you can seamlessly look at and orchestrate your journey, how the flow works and what are the critical elements in the flow. How do you expedite those flow elements and integrate them seamlessly to reduce the lead time. Now, I will also introduce a concept of continuity phases, and this is extremely important. If you're just starting up your journey to DevOps with financial services, obviously you cannot get overwhelmed with all this, right? So you'll have to have the first starting points for technology adoption. So again, there's a list of additional elements which we can also introduce, but at level 1, just start with continuous integration. Level 2 can be looking at like lift and shift. Level 2 can be like shift left strategy, which is like test automation, source code scanning. Then you have orchestration, which is like source code build and release, and like basic functionality on top of whatever you have already done at level 1. Then you can also mature this into something with support of, let's say, your SRE practices, progressive delivery capability, and observability. So these are things which you can look at like as levels or phases and map the continuity journey of DevOps into it. And then there you can start adding more components to it, like standards or methodologies or policies, control, process, guidelines, and all those kind of things. I'll also kind of give you an example of technology and tools landscape. Let's say you're starting your journey with financial services as a DevOps engineer. So this is a bird's eye view. So you should look at some of these components. There are plethora of tools in each of these main domains, but I've mentioned a few to just give you an idea of what we are talking about. So if you look at this picture, knowledge management and collaboration, number of tools like Jira, Confluence, Teams, Azure DevOps, these are popular ones. Code management and version control, you can start looking at Git, GitHub. Test automation and management, Selenium, Cucumber, JUnit, SonarQube, Semi, and there are many other tools like that. And then you have artifact management like JFrog Artifactory, continuous deployment. Again, this is a very crowded space, but I have mentioned Argo CD because I think this is one of the most progressive capability in the continuous deployment context. But you can look at other providers as well, GitLab, Harness, and all those kind of applications. Observability, of course, Prometheus, Grafana, Splunk, OpenTelemetry, and tools and services around observability. There are a number of them. Containers, of course, Kubernetes and Kubernetes ecosystem, Docker. These are kind of elementary things you should start to kind of embrace. Infrastructure as code, again, this is becoming very populated with number of other tools, but I mentioned Terraform for simplicity. And then traditional tools like ServiceNow for service management. Again, this looks very fancy, but standard technology is not always straightforward. It is not a lift and shift overnight, so it requires a lot of effort and due diligence to investigate which tool is good for you. If you can build your tool yourself, or you have to buy that tool, what kind of orchestration you would follow, interoperability standards, and all those kind of things. I would also mention some of the progressive parts of the DevOps deliveries, which can enable financial services and also take them a notch higher. So feature flags of I'll mention feature flags, but progressive delivery is more than feature flags. But for simplicity, I have mentioned feature flags at a simple level, that they are an if statement in your code that allows a feature to be remotely updated in runtime without having to redeploy a code, which is very important in financial services domain, because you can manage the risk of deploying features in production. So feature flags allow you to decouple the technical step of deploying the code from the business decision of releasing the feature. So you can build an hypothesis, do an experimentation, and then also bring that feedback loop to ensure that you enable data-driven business decisions. Testing in production, you can gradually release the feature to real select customers, either by predetermined criteria or other methods like algorithms, which can also enable you to build some new hypotheses and bring some new ideas on the table. Tailor product experiences to support customer acquisition, cross-selling efforts, speed up experimentation, and minimize risk in deployment. So when you talk about, let's say, micropayment, which is trending, these are areas where you can actually make use of these feature flags and bring more products and services through which you can promote cross-selling, upselling, cross promotions, and a number of other things. Observability, again, a very interesting and important and critical topic for financial services organizations which are already using cloud native technologies like platforms like Kubernetes or microservices or containers, because it's harder to maintain the system with traditional monitoring tools. What observability does, it allows you to deduce the internal health of and the status of the system by observing the external data it produces, and usually grouped in logs, matrices, or traces. In banks, we can empower themselves by delivering the digital personalized services that customers are craving for. So observability is again a very important tool in the DevOps toolbox, which can enable feedback loops for progressive delivery as well. Platform engineering, this is my last slide. but I think it's very, very interesting. Platform engineering is a really rising discipline where dedicated teams of engineers help to develop and manage common tools and applications that can be used by IT teams throughout the organization. Again, we understand financial domain is more than IT tools and technology, and to enable that future fit financial services, organizations should reduce the cognitive load on the people. So check out the session from DevOps Summit 2022. There's an excellent session by Matthias on starting a platform engineering team when and where. He is the head of technology from PicPay. He came to DevOps Summit Canada last year to talk about his experience. I've also created a session on platform engineering. If you're interested, you can also look at that session. With that, I think we come to an end of today's topic. Next time, I'm going to discuss Kubernetes and the best practices for Kubernetes. So stay tuned for that. We are coming up with new sessions every Thursday, as well as we are meeting face to face on a monthly basis in each of these chapters. So please do visit our chapters and see if you are interested to kind of move the needle for all the DevOps people in Canada. With that, I sign off for today. Stay tuned for our next session and